Hey everyone, welcome back to another video, and in this video we'll be talking a bit about The Bad Batch episode 5, which came out a little while ago. Now this episode was another decent episode. It wasn't anything crazy, it wasn't as good as episode 1, it was just another pretty solid episode. Nothing crazy in it, but there are a few characters that we have seen before that appear, and some other new characters, so nothing crazy, but nothing bad. And I think that towards the end of this season, we will start to see more and more interesting episodes. So the episode starts out with the Bad Batch and Omega on their ship, and in the previous episode, they were chased down by a bounty hunter who is trying to find Omega, and that bounty hunter almost took Omega. And as the Watcher, we know that this bounty hunter is Fennec Shand. But the other clones, they don't know this yet, so they go to a Jedi informant on Ord Mantell named Sid. Now they don't know anything about Sid, they just know that they could get help from Sid, so they have a bit of a hard time finding where this person is at. But eventually they do find him with a little bit of help from Omega. So Sid turns out to be a female Trandoshan, and she runs a parlor called Sid's Parlor. And when the Bad Batch and Sid meet, she brings them into her office, and her office is actually very interesting. I think it's one of the most interesting parts of the episode. There's a lot of detail put into her office. So the first things in Sid's office that really popped out to me were the little scythe kind of thing that Omega looked at right as we started to see the office. There was also a big horn or tooth, I think it was a tooth, right on her desk, and there was a large pelt behind her on her chair. Now, I don't know what any of those are. I don't know what the weapon kind of scythe looking thing is, and I'm not sure what kind of tooth that is, or what animal it's from, or what the pelt is from. But when I looked through the office a second time, I did see a few very interesting things. Now, in many of the background shots of her office, you can see a few different helmets. So the first one is a Phase 2 clone helmet, just a normal infantry one, which is interesting. It's kind of cool to see that she collects clone helmets. And then the second one is a Phase 2 clone pilot helmet, which is also interesting. And the third one, which is probably the most interesting, is a white Mandalorian helmet. Now, I don't know where she got these helmets from, how she got them, but it's really interesting to see that Sid has a Mandalorian helmet. And, you know, those are kind of rare. You don't see those every day. So it's kind of interesting to think, where did she get those from? And what kind of connections does she have to get these helmets? Eventually, the Bad Batch and Sid made a deal. Basically, the deal was Sid would give the information of the bounty hunter who was after them, as long as the Bad Batch did a mission for Sid. Now, this mission wasn't too hard. The mission that Sid wanted them to do was she wanted them to go rescue a kid from a Zygerian slave camp. And she didn't say much about the kid, she just said that they needed to save her and bring her back to her office, and that's what they went to do. Now they go to get this child, and they encounter these Zygerian slavers that have the kid, and the Zygerian slavers are actually quite interesting. So if you don't know, Zygerians are a humanoid feline species, and they actually built a large empire by selling slaves, and they're very connected to the slave trade. Not all Zygerians, but most of them. And under the Republic, they didn't do very well because the Republic banned slavery. But this is during the start of the Empire, so they started really getting into slavery again, and selling slaves and buying slaves. And this is like right at the start of the golden era again of slavery. So the Bad Batch, when they're trying to save Muchi, they end up actually getting enslaved by the Zygerians. They get caught when trying to save Muchi. And they actually encounter two Falleen, which is a species in the Star Wars universe. They're mostly known for their green skin, their weird rigid shaped skulls, and their black hair. Many of them are connected to the Black Sun. We see this in the Clone Wars, and you know, the Black Sun was at one point controlled by Maul, so there's a lot of connections there with different characters. However, not all of the Falleen were associated with the underworld. Many were just normal citizens. And from what we see in this episode, these two Falleen just seem like normal citizens, not underworld related or gang related or anything. They're just normal people. Now, Omega ends up saving the Bad Batch from the Zygerian slavers, as I said before. And the way she does this is she actually releases Muchi, who is the one they've been trying to save. And Muchi ends up being a baby Rancor, which is quite interesting, and I didn't expect this at all. So I actually learned some very interesting things during this video, and the main thing that I learned is that Rancors are originally from Dathomir, which I never knew. And if you don't know, Dathomir is where Darth Maul is from, and where Mother Talzin's from, where the Night Sisters are from, basically where all the Zabraks are from. And I never knew that Rancors came from the same planet, and that's something pretty interesting. So the Zygerians in this episode actually have some really interesting weapons that we don't normally see. Normally we just see blasters, normal blasters, and that's about it. Sometimes we'll get the occasional rocket launcher. Of course, we'll see lightsabers and tanks and stuff, but we see a couple interesting weapons in this episode. So the more common of the two that I wanted to talk about is the electrified net gun. Now, the net gun basically shoots 5 balls of energy, and these 5 balls of energy make a net that is electrified, so when it goes around a target, it knocks them out from the electricity, and it's very good at catching people or animals. So Zygerian Slaver actually uses an electrified net gun in this episode to try to catch Muchi the Rancor, but he is unsuccessful. We actually see this net in the Clone Wars a couple times. The most notable time was when a Trandoshan used the electrified net gun on Ahsoka and actually captured her. Now, the second blaster I wanted to talk about is the Zygerian crossbow. Now, this Zygerian crossbow was an energy bow that fired purple bolts similar to a blaster, except it had a deactivated and activated mode. The activated mode was ready to fire. It had energy flowing through the bow, and it was all ready to go, where the deactivated mode was more for storage and non-combat areas. So the final weapon I wanted to talk about is the Electro Whip, also known as the Zygerian Slaver Whip. So these whips were used on slaves to subdue them and stop them from misbehaving. And in the episode, we see Hunter actually gets whipped by one of these whips, and it is very painful to the person who's being whipped. And we actually see Obi-Wan and Anakin in the Clone Wars get these whips used on them, and they can resist somewhat, but it's very hard for them to do so. So those are the weapons that I wanted to talk about, and now I want to talk about a creature called the Brezak. In this episode, we see the Brezak fight the Rancor Muchi, while a Zygerian slaver is riding the Brezak. So Brezaks are very large lizards that are able to glide using their large skin flaps on each side of them. They have a light bone structure, a lot like a bird, so they can glide farther without falling as much, and they have a flat tail to maneuver around in the air. So Zygerians, especially Zygerian slavers, use the Brezaks a lot, especially the guards of the Zygerians and the leaders of Zygeria also use the Brezaks to move around to different places. And this would make sense because the Zygerians and the Brezaks are both from Zygeria. A little fun fact is that in the Clone Wars, both Anakin and Obi-Wan rode Breezax on Zygeria when they were trying to save a bunch of Togruttans from slavery. So back to the episode, once the Bad Batch finally rescues Muchi from the slavers, they bring Muchi back to Sid and they get the bounty and the money. And the one who put the bounty on Muchi was none other than Jabba the Hutt. So, if you don't know already, Bib Fortuna is basically Jabba's right-hand man. He's the chief of staff, and he's been the chief of staff for years in Jabba's palace, and he handles all of the day-to-day activities and operations in the palace and dealings outside of the palace as well. So we actually see Bib right at the end of the episode when he's picking up Muchi after the Bad Batch brings them back to Sid's parlor, and Bib gives Sid and the Bad Batch the money and he goes on his way. We also see a couple Gamorrean guards, which is also cool to see. Now the final thing I wanted to talk about is Fennec Shand, who is a bounty hunter after the Bad Batch. So we've seen Fennec Shand in the previous episode, which I haven't gone over the past few episodes, I've been behind and stuff, but we see Fennec Shand in this episode as well, just on hologram though, and the deal was once the Bad Batch brings back Muchi, they get 30% of the bounty credits, and they get information on who this bounty hunter is, because right now they don't know who Fennec Shand is. So, once they bring back Muchi, they get the 30% of the credits from the bounty, and Sid then tells them that this bounty hunter who's after them is Fennec Shand. Now, at this point in time, it's early, almost pre-Empire. This is like very early Empire stages. So, Fennec is a very new bounty hunter at this point. So it's going to be kind of interesting to see how the Bad Batch deals with Fennec and what Fennec does in the future episodes, because it seems like they're really trying to develop Fennec's backstory and just develop the character of Fennec Shand. And it's pretty clear that they're doing this because she is going to be in the Book of Boba Fett, and right now the audience doesn't have much of an emotional attachment to Fennec because her first appearance is in Mando, and we basically know nothing about her other than what we've seen in Mando. So it's good to kind of get a backstory on Fennec. And now that we've seen the backstory of Fennec and what Fennec has had to go through, the audience of Star Wars will have more of a connection to Fennec, and they will actually care about what happens to Fennec in the Book of Boba Fett. Because before, we had very little to go on. We really didn't know who she was or what she has gone through, and we didn't have as much of a connection because of that. But now that we've kind of seen her backstory, we can actually relate to her, and we'll care more about what happens to her in the future. Alright guys, thanks for watching. That was my analysis of episode 5, and I will see you in the next one.